What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel.
Okay, so I was going through Injustice Year 5, and one of the things that I realized is that we really need to do the annual for Injustice Year 4. Now, as a rule, I've kind of avoided the annuals, and the reason why is because for the most part, they're more entertaining than actually necessary to the story, but Year 4 is pretty necessary. It's, the Year 4 annual is actually kind of required, and the reason why is because with the Injustice line of stories, Years 1, 2, and 3 were really fun, but the question everybody had is, how do those segue into the game? Year 4 began the process of that transition, and then Year 5 really kind of finishes it out and basically ends going into the game. With regards to getting from Year 4 to Year 5, the annual takes care of that for us. And so it's really kind of a necessary piece of reading here. But what I wanted to do is really kind of go through this because this focuses on the concept of the character of Plastic Man. And this actually raises some really cool moral arguments too, because what's basically happened at the beginning of this Year 4 annual is that a handful of terrorists had basically taken down a Superman statue. Now, these guys are noobs. I mean, that's basically what they are. These guys have no idea what they're doing. They take down a statue and they don't understand the impact of what it is they're doing. To them, they're just committing an act of revolution against the regime of Superman. In reality, they're sending a huge moral message. And that's really the issue here. The reason why is because in the realm of injustice, we get some really interesting philosophical arguments on freedom and security. A really cool idea here is that with Batman and his team, they fight on the side of freedom. They fight on the idea of a free society. But Superman's argument could be, well, if you have freedom, then show me your freedom. Put your freedom in the palm of my hand. If you believe in freedom so strong, then surely it's something that's tangible. Surely it's something that exists. If you believe it's something that is inherently entitled to you, then show me where your freedom is. And if they can't do that, well, then the response of Superman is, well, freedom is simply a privilege that no one's bothered to take away yet. But I'm taking that privilege away. I'm taking away your right to be free. There's nothing you can do to stop me, which is true. But on the other side of the coin, Batman makes a convincing case, because if freedom was a tangible object, how easy would it be to keep it protected? You just throw it in a safe. Nobody can access it. You put it in the center of town surrounded by armed guards so everybody can see how valuable it is, but you also make sure there's a measure of protection. If freedom was a tangible thing, it would be so easy to protect. But freedom exists only so long as there are people who are willing to fight for it. And that's why this idea of injustice is so cool in terms of these 5 people that have no real idea what it is that they're doing. Because what it tells us is that so long as there are people who are willing to stand up to Superman's regime, then freedom will always exist. They'll always inspire people to continue fighting because what they're doing is promoting an idea. An idea is something that cannot be physically destroyed. So long as somebody believes in it, it will live on forever. And so the cool thing about this is that what we also learned from Barry Allen is that there are basically 6 people who are involved in this, but we only see 5. And the question is, why do we only see 5? Well, then from here, we pick up with a guy who basically has the ability to shapeshift and make himself into different objects, physical and so on and so forth. And the initial indication seems to be that it's Plastic Man, when in reality, it's actually Plastic Man's son. And that's kind of cool, but almost immediately after he makes his presence known, he's taken out by Superman. I mean, he's really grabbed by Superman and just kind of moved away. Now, I guess, taken to their local prison. Now, from here, we actually come into the character of O'Brien with Plastic Man himself. And this is awesome because what happens is Brian Buccellato basically sits down and says, Plastic Man's no laughing matter. This guy's not a goof. Of course, Plastic Man is the predecessor to Reed Richards, right? Plastic Man appeared in 1941. Reed Richards appeared some 20 years later. And it's just one of those instances where Marvel and DC borrow, they give and take from one another and use that to kind of bolster their own landscape. And so it creates an interesting situation because what ends up happening here is by virtue of Superman, Wonder Woman, different people, they're basically making the case that Plastic Man is going to come for his son. And when he does, they have to be on alert. Now, of course, with Sinestro, he doesn't really consider Plastic Man to be any measure of a threat. He's like, this is ridiculous. Why are we worried about him? It's really because Wonder Woman, Superman, Cyborg, those guys chime in and say, because Plastic Man's probably the most dangerous out of all of us. You have no idea how dangerous this guy is. And it's true. And that's why Plastic Man fans love him. That's why they absolutely adore this guy. He never gets any respect. Warner Brothers is never going to release a Justice League movie and have Plastic Man in there because people would be like, well, that's stupid. But Plastic Man is a super capable guy. And the reason why is because he can basically basically do whatever he wants with his body. He's literally a man made of plastic. He can make himself invulnerable to physical harm. He's immortal. He can shapeshift into virtually anything. He can take on massive amounts of size. He can stretch his body out. He can do all kinds of crazy stuff. He's extremely intelligent. If we were to say, for example, Plastic Man versus Superman, I would say Plastic Man under normal circumstances would win. The issue is that Superman has frost breath, and Plastic Man's biggest weakness is extreme cold. If Superman didn't have frost breath, Plastic Man would win. And so it creates a really cool situation because it's only by one little thing that Superman comes out on top. And that shows you how close the two of them are to one another. But even with Plastic Man coming in here, he's always been some measure of a joker, right? Like Plastic Man in the mainline DC comics, really before the New 52, he was always the joker of the group. He was always the lighthearted guy. He was always the one that injected humor into stories that would have otherwise been extremely serious. Tower of Babel is a really good example. Throughout all the events that were going on, the fact that Plastic Man was almost destroyed when he was frozen and then shattered, he always kept it cool. He always kept a little bit of humor in there. He was always kind of the funny guy. And so because of that, it's really this situation where he walks in, and it's a little bit of humor, which turns into anger. And the reason why it turns into anger is because of the fact that Superman and his team will not listen to reason. They're so far gone. And that's the crazy thing, is because Plastic Man's on the outside looking in. We have not seen him yet. We've not seen him in the story. And so it's basically a guy who's kind of been on the outside looking in. He hasn't been part of Batman. He hasn't been part of Superman, walking in and basically saying, you guys have no idea how far you've fallen. And that's the case that's being made here, is Brian Buccoletto saying, sitting down and saying, this is the frog in boiling water versus water that's being turned up. You take a frog, you throw it into a pot of boiling water, it'll try its best to get out of there. But if you take a frog and you put it in a pot of water and gradually turn up the heat, it'll just boil to death. And that's exactly what's happening here. Like, Superman was a guy who started out with the best of intentions, only to find himself making, concessions every step of the way. He drew a line in the sand, and he said, this is a line that we don't cross. And then they crossed the line. So he drew another line and said, this is the line that we don't cross. And then they crossed that line. And so he drew another line and said, this is the line that we don't cross. He kept making concessions every single step of the way until it got to the point that he just found himself tumbling down this rabbit hole of being a bad guy and became the villain. And that's what's so ironic about this. For decades and decades and decades in DC Comics, Superman was a protector of the world, always a protector of humanity, always this bright beacon in the sky that humanity would aspire to become. In this story, he's the bad guy. He's the threat to humanity. And so it creates these really cool concepts. And so what ends up happening here is Barry Allen and Plastic Man actually go for some measure of a walk, just because of the fact that Superman says, you're not getting your son back. And what's cool about this is it's kind of, Buccoletto, harkening back to the whole aspect of Plastic Man having been part of the Justice League, having served along part of the Justice League, being friends with various members. And then he basically lures Barry Allen down an alleyway and then subdues and that really shows you what's so cool about this. Now, in terms of the core reason for why he's doing this, the motivation is simply to be a major part of his son. That's really what he says. I mean, where Cyborg shows up and basically wakes Flash up, says, hey man, is everything okay? We basically end up finding out that Plastic Man more or less moved Flash out of the way. He, kind of has him hidden really for the most part. And that what's going on is that this version of Flash is basically Plastic Man. That's really what's going on here. And so the idea is that with Plastic Man orchestrating his son's escape from the trench, which is where this prison for supervillains is being held, he says that in his mind, he always left his son hanging, that he was never really there for his son when his son needed him there. That as being a member of the Justice League, it always took up so much of his time. He never went to his son's, major events. He never went to his son's baseball games. He was never a major part of his son's life. And it's him sitting down and saying, this is my chance to be a part of my son's life. And that's why this works so well, because whether it's because of the jobs that we work, whether it's because maybe we have kids and we're going back to school, whatever the case may be, even military life, there are a lot of parents out there, mothers and fathers alike, who sit down and say, I wish I could spend more time with my kids, but I can't because of X, Y, and Z. And X, Y, and Z allows me to put a roof over their head. It allows me to put food on the table. It allows me to put clothes on their back. I have to make the sacrifice of spending time with my child in order to make sure that my child can have the things that my child needs in order to be healthy, in order to grow up, in order to enjoy their life, even though they don't have me in it as much as they would like. And that's the cool thing about this. But of course, we end up having Plastic Man basically just kind of breaking into this prison. That's what's so ironic about it, is because he can infiltrate virtually anything. If there is a room and that room has some way to access it, he can get in. The other half of this is that we also find out what ended up happening to a bunch of the members of the Green Lantern Corps. The biggest issue was that a lot of the concepts with the Green Lantern Corps was that a lot of them were killed, but then a lot of them were also just sort of taken prisoner, and we didn't really know that at the time. We just knew they were stripped of their rings, but we didn't really know what it was that Sinestro had done with them. And so we basically find a whole lot of them just being held down in this trench prison. Now keep in mind, because of the fact that members of the Green Lantern Corps are nothing without their rings, all they had to do was take their rings away and they're just normal people. So they're just kind of kept in general population. But what ends up happening is Plastic Man goes to Kilowog and says, I need to know where my son is, Luke McDonough. Do you have any idea where he's located at? Now, of course, Kilowog's response is people with superpowers are kept in isolation so they can't orchestrate a prison break, which makes sense. Plastic Man also says, look, I need you guys to create a distraction. Now, I love the way this distraction goes down. I love the way this distraction happens. Kilowog is a badass, right? Like he's a dude that will ring or no ring, he'll fight to the death. He runs up on Bane, right? And he's just like, I have no idea how to insult your mother in your language, so I'm just gonna headbutt the hell out of you. And it just orchestrates this huge prison fight. That's really all it is. It's just a bar fight in a prison. And it's amazing to see because it's just everybody fighting everybody else. And that's one of the reasons why Plastic Man is so intelligent, because you got to keep in mind, these guys, all these different villains, they're one, trying to avoid their own nature, which is to create conflict, and two, they're just filled with anger and rage because in their mind, they're being, incarcerated unjustly. And that's true for a lot of these guys. A lot of these guys were already in prison at the time, but they were serving out their prison sentence. But the idea is that they would serve their prison sentence, they would pay their debt to society, and then they would be allowed to go free. In this Superman regime, there is no freedom. They were criminals at one point. They committed a crime at one point in their life, and so now they're going to be in jail forever. But in the end, he's able, of course, to break into the cell where his son's located at and free his son. The problem is that in the process, the warden realizes what it is the Plastic Man is doing. He triggers the alarm and he frees some of the more superpowered villains. Now, what happens with this is it's basically this idea that a lot of these superpowered villains are being brainwashed, or they're being used by Superman for the purpose of serving as an army. That will be a huge part of year 5, but that's the process that's basically being undergone at this particular point in time. But of course, then we end up seeing the appearance of Metamorpho. Now, of course, Metamorpho is a character that can turn himself into a lot of different materials. He can literally metamorph into a multitude of different things, like gaseous form, liquid form, so on and so forth. But he's basically the warden here. The reason being because of the fact that if there were a riot that were to break out, he could basically turn into whatever it is that he needs to turn into in order to quell the riot. And so, of course, with Superman's arrival on the scene, the biggest issue they have is, well, Plastic Man's in here. They're literally in the trench, which is a prison in the extreme depths and pressures of the ocean. What are they going to do to get out? Well, the response of Plastic Man is give the Green Lanterns their ring back. And that's exactly what happens. The Green Lanterns get all their rings and they basically have a chance to stand up against Sinestro now. Well, that's what's cool about this, is because now it's the return of the Green Lantern Corps. The issue is, as far as I know, they probably won't appear again. I haven't read the entirety of year 5, so please don't spoil it for me. But of course, Sinestro in the process kills Kilowog. Now, the death of Kilowog was not an accident. It wasn't like Sinestro just kind of blind fired into the building and then shot whoever it is that he happened to shoot, and it just turned out to be Kilowog. Kilowog is a rallying force for the Green Lanterns. A lot of them were trained by Kilowog, and so there's a lot of respect for him. And so if anybody was going to rally all of the Green Lanterns to a single cause, it would be Kilowog. Not to mention Kilowog, with the exception of Hal Jordan, is the most capable of all the existing Green Lanterns. And so if there were anybody that could lead a force that included Batman and what's left of the Earth superheroes and villains against the regime of Superman and prove to be successful, it would have been Kilowog. The issue here is that with him presumably dead, and of course a hole in this dome, it leads to a massive calamity. I mean, it's really just water pouring in, the pressure's pouring in, and what ends up happening here is Plastic Man, of course, holds the waters at bay. Now, the idea here seems to be that Bucalotto's setting up in the direction that a Plastic Man's going to sacrifice his life, but this also shows us the ingenuity that he has, how intelligent he is, and how far ahead he plans. What he had done is he had basically taken the belt of Mirror Master. And remember, the belt of Mirror Master basically creates portals. It creates mirrors to a degree. Any object that can reflect an image can be used as a mirror. And so the idea is create a portal and send them somewhere else. And that's how they engineer their escape. Mirror Master's belt leads to the mass escape of all of these prisoners that are being held in place. And it's so cool because the other half here seems to be the Plastic Man's gonna die. I mean, his body's stretching. It's not really able to hold out against these forces. But his son comes up and his son says, look, I recognize that you feel like you haven't been the best father ever, but don't be stupid. Don't sacrifice your life for something stupid. Come on with me and we'll get out of here. And that's exactly what happens. Plastic Man and his son basically just bail out. But the other cool thing about this, and this is something that had never really been thought about before, is Plastic Man and his son address all the different villains that are there. And of course, Plastic Man's son, his son Luke is just kind of like, look, I mean, we freed all these villains. That's cool. We're in the, the Mirror Master's realm. Are we really just going to let them go for free? Like, go back out in the world and do bad things? Because all we've done is just enabled a whole bunch of supervillains. I mean, it's cool that you rescued me, but who knows what kind of danger they would pose to society as a whole. And so this is really cool because Plastic Man sits down with all the villains and says, hey, look, guys, I know you're bad guys. Like, I know some of you guys are just like dicks. Like, some of you guys are just really bad people. But if you're gonna do bad stuff, do it in a way that makes Superman's life hell. Be bad guys and make Superman's life rough. Don't hurt innocent people, just make Superman's life really rough. And Killer Croc's like, yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, sure, I don't see why not. And it's just a really funny situation here. But what this does is again, the annuals are really kind of self-contained in a lot of ways. The events of the story are largely self-contained to a degree, in the sense that it's really Plastic Man and his son just kind of leaving, you know, and they're like, well, we could just kind of hide, we could just go underground until more qualified people take him down, and that's really it. But again, this is a pretty fun little story. It's an interesting little story. I enjoyed it. I mean, it was pretty cool to go through. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.